to you. Want to know what a beautiful day, what a great day. St. Patrick is smiling on us today, and it's couldn't ask for a lovely day to hold this hearing. We appreciate the effort of all of our witnesses to be with us today, and I'm especially delighted to be co-chairing this hearing with my colleague Bernie Sanders. And today's hearing is focused, as you know, on exploring the link between the Clean Air Act and the economy. And senators will have about 5 minutes for their opening statements, and then we'll recognize our panel of witnesses. Following the panel statements, we're going to have a couple of rounds of questions, maybe 2 rounds of questions, roughly 5 minutes each. The government, as some of you heard me say before, I think government has many roles to play. I think one of the most important roles that we have to play is to try to provide what I call a nurturing environment for job creation, job preservation. If in my state, and frankly in any state in this country, if we have companies that are successful, they're playing by the rules, they're being good corporate citizens, they're making money, paying taxes, hiring people to work, people coming out of colleges and universities, out of high schools, off of welfare rolls, off of unemployment rolls. In my business, if you got all that going for you, you know, the rest is pretty easy. The role of government is not to be the lapdog for business, but to try to provide a nurturing environment for job creation. For the last 40 years, the EPA has tried to do its part to enable the federal government to play that critical role. The EPA has sought to foster economic growth while ensuring that Americans are protected from life-threatening pollution, including air pollution. In 1970, President Nixon signed into law the Clean Air Act. This act established a framework, as we know, to curb, among other things, our air pollution. This law was so successful that over 200,000 lives were saved between 1970 and 1990. In 1990, President George Herbert Walker Bush built upon President Nixon's legacy with the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. And that's the act that gave us the clean air laws that we live with today. Lately, some have sought to make the claim that the Clean Air Act has raised costs for consumers and hurt our economy, but on closer analysis, the facts tell a somewhat different story. For example, since 1990, electricity rates adjusted for inflation have stayed constant in the United States, while our real gross domestic product has grown by some 60%. At the same time, we've saved thousands of lives, tens of thousands of lives, and we've ensured that our children, along with their parents and grandparents, can breathe cleaner, healthier air. For 2010 alone, cleaning up soot and smog saved over 160,000 lives. That's over twice the number of people who live where I live, in Wilmington, Delaware. And at the same time, our country saved some $1.3 trillion in health care costs by saving lives, reducing asthma attacks, and reducing sick days. Put another way, the Clean Air Act benefits outweigh the cost by a margin of 30 to 1. Talk about a return on investment. Just doesn't get a whole lot better than that. These clean air regulations help us save billions of dollars on public health costs while providing a multitude of opportunities for good-paying American jobs. According to recent reports, clean air regulations that will be promulgated later this year are expected to create as many as 1.5 million new jobs over the next 5 years, jobs that come at a crucial time as the economy continues to recover and begins to grow. These are American jobs in engineering, American jobs in design, as well as in manufacturing, installing and operating pollution control and clean energy technology that's made in America and sold all over the world. In closing, let me just leave us all with a quote from Harry Truman. President Harry Truman once said, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He said, "The only thing that's new in the world is the history we've forgotten or never learned." In closing, I want to invite my colleagues to take a little time to actually drill down on what I believe are the facts with regards to the Clean Air Act. I believe that once they see the facts, they'll come to realize that moving our country forward cannot mean going backwards, certainly not on clean air. That having been said, I want to recognize Senator Sanders, and then we'll move to our Republican colleagues. We thank you for being a part of it. And Senator Alexander, I've been wingman on the issue of cleaner air, particularly trying to address SOx, NOx, and mercury for, as he says, for a number of years. And I come from a state, as does Senator Sanders, where you know, we're the, sometimes I feel like we live at the end of America's tailpipe. And we have a bunch of states to the west of us who generate electricity by burning, in many cases, coal. Nothing against coal, but we need coal. We need really clean coal, actually. But putting bad stuff up into the air, and it just blows our way, and we end up breathing it. and it's especially frustrating. And Lamar mentioned the time he served as governor, and I was a little bit after him, but so very frustrating. We're trying to meet our clean air requirements and to stay in compliance with the guidance of the regs and so forth. And for us, I could literally shut down Delaware in order to try to be in attainment on some of this stuff, and we still would have been out of attainment because the folks out to the west of us were putting dirty stuff into the air and simply came our way. It's just not fair. It's not, and we had to compete with these folks in terms of electricity costs, and they were burning cheap electricity, a lot of times created by coal, and it was just not fair. I'm a big believer in the golden rule: treat other people the way we want to be treated, and part of what we want to do is make sure that happens in this instance. All right, long introductions now for our panel members. I hope you folks are, Paul Allen, you were sort of like introduced in a left-handed way by Ben Cardin. Are you the same Paul Allen who founded Microsoft? Is that you? Maybe the mail will give you the wrong dividend check, will go to the wrong Paul Allen. In your case, the right one. So, all right, just wanted to check. All right, Barbara Sumpson. Is it Sumpson? Yeah, Barbara Sumpson, Legislative Director of the United Auto Workers. Welcome. We used to have a lot of auto workers in Delaware. UAW represented Local 1183 at Chrysler and 435 at GM, and the GM plant is coming back to life, and we're going to be starting to build late next year a bunch of cars by Fisker, beautiful, beautiful luxury cars that get 80 miles per gallon. And I suspect they're going to be built by some of your folks. That's good. We're looking forward to that. All right, got here from Dover. Dover, of course, is our capital. And I used to spend a lot of time in the capital of Ohio, Columbus. I was a Buckeye, Ohio State. And I've actually driven through your city a time or two. So we're glad that the other Dover, the mayor from the other Dover is here. And I understand that you pronounce your name Homringhausen? Hausen. Okay, good. All right. Has anybody ever mispronounced your name? No. Okay, just checking. Mayor of Dover, welcome. Again, Ben's already given Mr. Allen a bit of an introduction. We're happy you're here, Mr. Allen. Next, we have Mr. David Montgomery, Vice President of the Charles River Associates. There's a Charles River that runs right through Boston, made famous in song. And my son, Christopher, just graduated from school up there. He used to run right along that river. In fact, he and I have run it many times together. And it's nice to have you here. And finally, James A. Yan, right? Yan, Vice President, Managing Director of Alstom Power. We're happy to see you. And welcome one and all. Your entire statements will be made part of the record. And if you'd like to summarize them, feel free to do that. But actually, try to stick to about 5 minutes. If you run a little bit over that, that's okay. If you run a lot over that, that's not okay. I'll rein you back in. But Ms. Thompson, why don't you lead these guys off, okay? Thanks. We're glad you're all here. Mr. Yen, thanks so much for wrapping us up here. Good testimony, and I think enlightening testimony in some cases. Testimony, I almost wish we'd let the witnesses ask questions of one another. Maybe we'll find a way to do that. Let me just start off by saying that Delaware does not include, in our state, we don't include the Chesapeake Bay. But tributaries from Delaware, including the Nanticoke River, actually lead to the Delaware Bay, or excuse me, to the Chesapeake Bay. And as it turns out, there are tributaries from maybe half dozen or so states that actually whose waters end up in the Chesapeake Bay. Chesapeake Bay has been struggling for a long time with sedimentation, all kinds of nutrients and so forth that have led to killing vast parts of the Chesapeake Bay. There's just not much going on there in terms of life. The folks in the Chesapeake who make their living off of as watermen don't much like this. And they've called on their elected officials to work on the rest of us to try to clean up our runoff so that they'll have actually a Chesapeake Bay that'll be alive and vibrant and provide livelihood for them. There's a couple of rivers that flow into my state from Pennsylvania. We use those rivers for the water when it gets to Delaware. We use it for drinking water, and we treat it, but we use it for drinking water. And there's a great concern about what the folks who live upstate from us in Pennsylvania are putting into what ultimately becomes our drinking water. In our Dover, Delaware, we end up breathing the air that brings with it pollution from Dover, Ohio. Brings pollution from Tennessee and Indiana, West Virginia, and we end up having to breathe that stuff. We end up having to reduce our emissions in order to try to be in compliance with federal environmental guidelines. We end up having to put extra pollution devices on our own utilities in order to reduce emissions. Really, and a lot of the stuff that we're breathing here comes from outside of our state. Jim Inhofe and I spend about half an hour together every Thursday in the Capitol, and a Bible study group is led by our chaplain, Barry Black, who's a retired Navy admiral, good guy. And he's always reminding us to, try to ask us, how does your faith guide you in what you do? And the other thing, he's a big guy, as Jim knows, Chaplain Black's a big believer in the golden rule. Treat other people the way we want to be treated. He likes to say the golden rule is the Cliff Notes of the New Testament. I just want to ask you, in thinking of those examples, our water's contributing to the pollution problems that they have in the Chesapeake, upstream water pollution that comes down and we end up having in our drinking water, and the air that we breathe in Dover that is polluted by places as far away as Dover, Ohio, and further west than that. How is that consistent with the golden rule? Mayor?
Well, in Dover's example, we've always had a strong commitment to being good stewards of the environment. We were the first municipal electric system in the United States to install gas-fired co-burners to clean up our emissions on startup when we fire up the coal. We also have the ability to co-fire with gas. With the price of gas, we don't do that. We have switched to a different coal that allows us to burn cleaner. We have installed a $6.15 million baghouse, which I don't think we bought from Alstom. But our opacity is next to nil. We have a very clean operation. We do what we can to do our part to clean up the environment, and that's always been our commitment ever since I've been mayor since 1992. And we do it consistently. We're always looking at ways to clean up any problem areas that we might have. So I understand that you are getting some kind of transport from other areas of the country, but I would doubt very much that it's coming from Dover, Ohio.
Well, I hope not. We compete for jobs. We got a former mayor up here and a couple of recovering governors, and we compete for jobs every day against other states and against the rest of the world. Among the two driving factors in creating that nurturing environment for job creation, job preservation, one is the cost of power, cost of electricity. Another is the cost of health care. And I would just suggest to you that when we're trying to compete with states that get much cheaper utility costs because they burn dirty fuels and create pollution for us, and we have to increase our utility costs in part to try to to control those emissions, and then we end up paying higher health care costs. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. And I would just ask you to keep that when the folks in Dover, Ohio, are thinking about your pollution and what to do in terms of reducing your emissions. I hope you'll keep in mind that there are folks in other Dovers that end up having to breathe this stuff, and we end up having to pay higher health care costs. We have thousands of kids that aren't in school today because of the asthma, because they can't breathe the air. It's just not fair. And I would just ask you to keep that in mind. The great thing about this situation we're in is it actually can create jobs. And Mr. Montgomery, you seem to suggest that it doesn't. And maybe these folks that are working on air pollution control devices and installing those in places across the country, that they could find other work. The unemployment rate in the construction industry is 21% today. And the folks that are doing the work that helps reduce these emissions, they just say, well, we're not going to reduce SOx, NOx, mercury emissions today. We want you to go out and go find other work. You'd be gainfully employed. The unemployment rate is over 20%. And it might be easy to sit here today in Washington, D.C. in its hearing room and say, well, they can find work someplace else. Well, if they could find work someplace else, I suspect they would be doing it. Let me come back to if I can, to Ms. Sampson. I was very much involved in the CAFE legislation, trying to come up with something that the auto industry could live with and it was fair to the rest of us as well. Talk to us, if you will, about, you know, and CAFE, we said, basically came to a bipartisan agreement. Ted Stevens, remember Ted Stevens, a big player in all this for us at the end and getting us to a situation where in CAFE 2007, we said by 2020, overall fleet average energy efficiency, fuel efficiency will be 36 miles per gallon. We still had a problem, though, because there was a question, are we going to have a California standard? We're going to have separate standards for different states. And the current administration got involved and said, let's just try to not have a bunch of different standards. Let's just have one standard, 36 miles per gallon. We're going to have it by 2016. The auto industry bought in, UAW bought in. Just talk to us about why that makes sense and why that's a good idea.
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. And I will point out that under the EPA NHTSA 1 national program that runs from 2012 to 2016, will be at 35.5 miles per gallon by 2016. So we moved that up considerably. The auto industry is one where planning has to be done years and years in advance, and the investments are enormous capital investments, and they need the certainty of what is going to be demanded of them in order to develop, to do the research and development, to do the retooling of the facilities, to train workers, to get the equipment. They need that years out. 5 years, which is the authority that NHTSA has, is actually not even an ideal time for how long ahead we have to be planning. We definitely need one national standard and not a patchwork of different regulations for different parts of the country. It would be way too difficult to be manufacturing and selling and keeping track of things in different states. But if I can take this opportunity to just play off a little what Mr. Montgomery said, I am not an economist, and I'm not going to speak to job growth, green jobs in other parts of the economy. But the job growth that we've seen here that I testified to today, these are jobs that would not be in this country otherwise. That up until a year ago, there was really only one facility in the United States that was making the components for advanced technology vehicles, and that was the White Marsh facility in Maryland, and it was making them for trucks. So that the advanced vehicles, the vehicles of the future, and their components were all being imported. Priuses are imported. All the engines and the powertrains for the high-tech vehicles that are assembled here in the United States, all of them were being imported from Japan or Italy or Germany. And we are now seeing, because of some of the things I testified about, the growth of these 30 new plants. We will actually be able to make the components, not just assemble from parts that are coming in from outside the United States, but these are truly new jobs because of the requirements that the industry knows they have to meet because of the one national standard.
Thanks very much. We've been joined by Senator Barrasso. Senator Johanns, thanks very much for your insightful questioning, very much. I want to go back to Mr. Yan, if I could. And as you know, in this country, we've been working on our air for, working on cleaner air for some 40 years. This year, we've have several clean air regs that are targeting our utilities, all of which are under court-ordered deadlines. Let me ask this, based on your past experience, do you feel that utilities can install the control technology that is needed to meet these new regulations in the time frame required?
Senator, we've talked to a number of them and worked with them, and everything is doable with a plan, and the plans are being developed. I think we need to be careful of any delay that could put a burden on that timeline and make it a more aggressive schedule.
Say that again. About a delay.
Any delay would put a burden on the schedule.
All right, I understand. I remember, gosh, about 5, 6 years ago, representatives from about 10 different utilities came in to see me. They're from all over the country, and Senator Alexander and I had been working on a 4 pollutant bill dealing with sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, mercury, and CO2 emissions, and trying to see if there was some way we could set up a market trading system to harness market forces to reduce at least SOx, NOx, and mercury SOx, NOx, and CO2 emissions, but not mercury. And at the end of the conversation, it's one guy from a Southern-based utility. I don't think it was from Southern utility, but Southern. He said, "Look," he said, "why don't talking to you?" He said, "Senator, why don't you do this? You and your colleagues do this. Tell us what the rules are going to be in terms of reducing emissions. Give us a reasonable amount of time. Give us some flexibility, and get out of the way." That's what he said. I thought that's pretty good advice. I still think that's pretty good advice. I want to go back to Mr. Allen, if I could. In your testimony, yes, sir, you shared with us the example of the Brandon Shores facility in Maryland. And I believe you said your company installed technology to meet a 2006 state reg that took approximately, I don't know, 24, 25, 26 months to install all the technology. And it was completed a year or two ago, maybe in 2009. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Do you believe this facility will meet recent EPA regulations of air toxics and SOx and NOx?
Yes.
Okay. As you know, we've seen several different job studies, have almost like dueling job studies going on here. We've seen several different job studies citing job creation with clean air regulations. How does your experience at Brandon Shores match up with some of these studies? Are they on target or are they off base?
Well, I can't speak to all of the studies. What I can say is that we have numbers that would be very similar to what I heard from Alstom in terms of what it takes to do the actual construction and installation of the equipment. It's harder for me to speak to the jobs in the supply chain. But if you think about who the supply chain is, I mean, it includes Alstom. It also includes Nucor Steel that we heard Senator Johans mention. It includes Lehigh Cement, which is a customer of Constellation Energies. It very importantly includes the heavy automotive industry that the United Auto Workers works in. So the supply chain contains a great many jobs. And then there are the constructors, the Bechtels, the Fluors, the Peter Kiewitz of the country who we depend upon, the Washington International Groups and Shaw and others, and then the engineering firms that Charles River consults to, the Stone & Websters and the Black & Veatches and the Babcocks and Wilcoxes and all of the rest of them. So yes, it's essentially an American industry. And I want to say something else about the jobs associated, because we know who the people are who build these facilities. They are, in fact, the same boilermakers and pipe fitters and engineers and steam fitters and laborers and teamsters and others who manage the outages and the maintenance of all of these facilities. These are people who have careers in doing the highly skilled jobs that are associated with the electric power industry. So that tells us two things. It tells us that they're there to be employed, and it also tells us that they need the employment in order to pursue their careers. So I guess I just think that that's an important thing to consider when you're wondering about whether or not there are jobs associated with kind of doing the fundamental work of operating the electric power system. It seems I've always thought that the question sort of answered itself.
All right, good. I like those questions that answer themselves. Can I come back, if I could, to Mr. Yan? And I think your company is, I've been told that your company is on the cutting edge of carbon capture and storage technology. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Senator, we are. We currently have 12 projects that are either in engineering or testing of CCS projects around the world, and making progress in that arena.
Okay. Is your company seeing an uptick in interest in this kind of technology with greenhouse gas regulations in place?
No, Senator, we're not.
Okay. Are you seeing a decrease in interest in this kind of technology with the new greenhouse gas regulations in place? Is the interest going up or down?
I would say it's going down, Senator.
Okay. So you're seeing fewer utilities expressing an interest in this carbon capture and storage technology.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think that is?
Utilities are in a complex situation. You know, they're trying to serve us, the consumers of power, and trying to serve us as the people who are citizens of the United States. They're trying to work a balancing act, and I think you said it very eloquently earlier. Please tell us what to do, give us a reasonable time to do it, and we'll go do it.
Does the price of natural gas, a dramatic drop in the price of natural gas, is that playing a role here?
It's complicating the issue.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Just really bluntly, do you believe that efficiency, we talked about, you know, and we're trying to get efficiencies in out of our mobile fleets, and we're going to come close to doubling the requirements for energy efficiency with our mobile fleets by 2016. But do you think from efficiencies that we can create jobs?
Senator, I don't think there's any silver bullet. There's a lot of silver buckshot. I think we have to take advantage of every opportunity we can to reach that solution.
Okay.
That's certainly part of it.
All right. Well, let me wrap up by, I'm going to come back and we're going to recognize Senator Barrasso, but then I want to come back and ask just one follow-up question. But and I'll telegraph the pitch right now. One of the things that I try to focus on here is how do we develop consensus? This is a pretty contentious place. And we need to try to find consensus in a whole lot of areas of deficit reduction and how to bring, in terms of healthcare, better outcomes, less money. What are we going to do about infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure? You know, all kinds. And we need to develop consensus to be able to address these complex and difficult issues. One of the things I'm going to ask you all to do, and it'll be my last question, is given where you're coming from in your testimonies, where do you think there's agreement amongst this panel? I'm just going to ask everybody here. Where do you think you agree with respect to, you know, cleaner air, increasing jobs, decreasing jobs? Where do you agree? And where do you think that you agree that actually might be helpful to us as we try to find consensus on these issues? Okay, that'll be my last question. So think about that, chew on that for a while. And in the meantime, Senator Barrasso, all right, folks, I've telegraphed my pitch. You're at the plate. There's a chance to hit one out of the park. Ms. Sampson, you want to go first?
Certainly. Thank you, Senator.
Ms. Thompson.
One thing I heard today that pleased me was that everybody is not just concerned about jobs, but about good jobs, and that good jobs are defined as high-paying jobs and jobs that provide benefits, which we see as pensions and health care. And I'm pleased that this is a bipartisan, and everybody on our panel seems to agree that that's a high value that we have to keep an eye on because, of course, we have a great concern about the loss of those jobs and the loss of the middle class. I think it's implicit that everybody cares about oil savings, and that, of course, we're all better off if our vehicles, for example, are more efficient. And I would suggest in answer to Mr. Montgomery that although it is true that the cost of the vehicle goes up, there are considerable savings to the consumer from the advanced technology vehicles. They pay less at the pump, and that's money that they can take and spend elsewhere, which stimulates jobs. With respect to Mr. Montgomery saying that that we'd have fewer car sales if we were to have more regulations, I think, in fact, that the drop in car sales is because of the economy, and the economy has led to such a high unemployment rate, so we're back again to jobs. So if we all agree that we need jobs and good jobs, that we all benefit from oil savings, and that we have some benefit, even if it might not be, we might argue over how great a benefit, to a healthier environment, I think everybody is really on the same page. And if this led to having Congress once again take up comprehensive climate change legislation, we think that would be a wonderful thing.
All right, thank you. There is a lot of pent-up demand for buying new cars, trucks, and vans. And we've gone from a time a few years ago, we were buying in this country 16 to 17 million units a year, down to as little as 9, 10 units. It's a lot of pent-up demand, and when the economy comes back, as the economy comes back, and people look at their old clunkers and their driveways and garages out on the street. One of the good things that's coming out of Detroit and other places too are far more energy efficient vehicles, far more energy efficient vehicles. So hopefully at a time when folks are looking for a new set of wheels, a lot of the sets of wheels that are available will be getting 30, 40, 50 miles per gallon, even 80 with that new Fisker and Chevrolet Volt. All righty, Mayor.
Thank you, Senator. I believe that we can all agree that we need to do what's in the best interest of the entire country in cleaning up our environment. But we also have to be very careful on what steps we take. You know, if the intent is to get away from burning coal, which is a very inexpensive resource, and move it towards natural gas or some other higher price commodity, we have to be cautious because increased need will increase the cost of natural gas. People can't afford to heat their homes with increased costs. They can't afford their electricity if the electricity price was raised because of natural gas. They can't afford that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. You say if the electricity price is raised because of natural gas, natural gas prices are down by half.
The higher cost of natural gas, if you have an increased demand, natural gas is going to increase in cost. Then also,
actually, demand is going up, but the price is going down. I know it seems counterintuitive, but that's what's happening.
Well, history shows that the more demand for a product, the more it's going to cost.
Unless the supply expands dramatically, that's what's happening.
And then you have to be wary of what is the fracking going to do to water supply. You know, there's a whole myriad of problems associated with this. But several years ago, I believe the Chinese were bringing online one new coal-fired power plant a week. No regulations. When they had the Olympics, they had to shut down 2 power plants so the air could be cleaned up so they could have the Olympics, which affected Dover Chemical, which one of their products is they need phosphate. Well, there were 2 places in the world that they could get phosphate, which was from China or Uzbekistan. Since they couldn't have the electricity to mine the phosphate, Chinese raised the prices by 300%, which put 60 employees at Dover Chemical out of work. So, and I read a report last week about the beneficial effects of the Clean Air Act from 1990 to 2000. And what struck me as very interesting, a map was where showed a map where all the pollution points were in the United States, yet it had Canada and Mexico with no points on the map. So I was just wondering if pollution follows boundaries.
All right, thank you. A comment on, I was born in West Virginia. My dad actually used to work in a coal mine for a while. And so I have a soft spot in my heart still for West Virginia and for the coal industry. I'm not interested in putting coal out of business. What I'm interested in doing is making sure as we burn it, we have a lot of it, as we burn it to create electricity, that we just burn it in a far cleaner way. Far cleaner way. That's what, and I want to go to the other witnesses because we need to close out.
Right, and I think in order to do that, we need to spend some serious dollars on clean coal technology.
And we have, and now what we need to do is to spend some serious dollars on implementing that technology that Dalston and others have. So that's part of our challenge. All right, thank you. Mr. Allen, some closing thoughts.
Well, I think what you heard was that everything is connected to everything else.
All right, thanks very much. And that's Mr. Montgomery. No, back to you, Mr. Allen.
And I also think that you heard a lot of different points of view struggling to understand and coalesce around the fundamental value proposition of environmental protection. And at some point, either you think that value is worth the cost or you don't. And to the extent that markets can be used to do 2 things, to express the most efficient way to achieve the value if you believe it's there, and second, to test how much consumers are willing to pay for it, then I think you've got probably the right formula. Mr. Montgomery said almost exactly the same thing if you think about it. He said that the costs sooner or later flow through to consumers. He's absolutely right. The question is, do consumers want to pay for the value that they get from particularly clean air? And I think we should leave that to them to decide.
Going back to the example I used earlier between Dover, Ohio, and Dover, Delaware, the consumers in the folks who are going to benefit most from cleaner air and from Dover, Ohio, are folks in Dover, Delaware, because of the transport of the emissions. And the folks who are going to have to bear, or have been bearing for years, high healthcare costs are the people on the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. And the investments made, in some cases in the Midwest, will actually benefit those of us who live in the rest of our country, at least in the eastern part of our country, because our healthcare costs are going to go down. And it's hard for me to make an argument. If I'm trying to compete with a company that's thinking about putting jobs in Dover, Ohio, or Dover, Delaware, and they say, well, we're inclined to go to Dover, Ohio. They have cheaper electricity costs, and their healthcare costs are lower. And that's hard for me to compete with. And we've actually, not to pick on Dover, we've actually had those battles, and they're hard to win.
I guess I'm in the camp of thinking we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right, thanks. Mr. Montgomery.
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing we can probably all agree on is that Ms. Sampson and I do not agree about the effects of regulation on the auto industry. I'd propose that the referee on that be a book by two economists at more or less democratic organization, the Brookings Institution, Pietro Navolo and Robert Crandall, who I would defer to on that subject, but I think that they support my point of view. I may be again, overly optimistic, but I think that we all agree that in doing any of these environmental regulations, it would be very helpful if they are done in a way that their stringency and application and timing responds in a more or less automatic way to what we find out are the costs of doing things. That in many ways we're hearing that it's arbitrary schedules and arbitrary unit-specific requirements that are not something that are adjustable because of the cost or difficulty of doing something, that is something really to be avoided. And I'd like to believe that that also makes us all agree that there are far better ways of dealing with greenhouse gas emissions than the Clean Air Act authorities of EPA. And finally, I'd love to talk to you about TMDL trading in the Chesapeake, because I think that one way we could deal with one of the golden rule problems is if Congress took up the subject of a 6-state trading system to improve the way in which the runoff is managed. But that's an entirely different subject.
That's a good. Maybe we can get Senator Cardin to join us in that conversation. All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Yan.
Thank you, Senator. I think we all believe in quality clean air, and I think we all believe in quality jobs. And I think we also believe that the market-based solutions provide the best option for addressing these issues. And I think, quietly, I'll end it at that.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I think President George Herbert Walker Bush faced as he had signed into law the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments was how are we going to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions? We had a real problem with acid rain at the time. We don't hear much about that anymore. And I think they wrestle with the question of, are we going to use a regulatory approach, or we're going to try to harness market forces and use that approach. In the end, the approach of using market forces, some were skeptical of whether that would actually work, but it turned out it worked pretty well. And I'm told we actually met our sulfur dioxide emission targets in about 1/2 the time that was anticipated, about 1/5 the cost. Pretty impressive. And I studied a little bit of economics at Ohio State, and later, after I got out of the Navy at the University of Delaware, I've always been fascinated by how do we harness market forces to drive good public policy behavior. So I don't know who came up with that idea, Mr. Montgomery, about to deal with acid rain, but I just thought it was very clever. And maybe sometime, somewhere along the way, we can find that apply to other things. The other thing I wanted to say, Laura Haynes, who's sitting right here over my left shoulder, hears me say about every other day in adversity. I like to quote Albert Einstein, one of the few people here who does. But he used to say, in adversity lies opportunity. And I am by nature an optimistic person. But I really think we face plenty of adversity these days. Not on the scale of what they face over in Japan right now. But we face plenty of adversity. And I think our challenge is, as we deal with that adversity, to try to derive from an opportunity, to realize opportunity. And God knows we need jobs here. We need good paying jobs. We need cleaner air. And we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, especially on oil, from other countries that are undemocratic and unstable. So my hope is that we can figure out around here, and the reason why, how to work together and find consensus, and the reason why I asked all of you to answer that last question was to maybe help plant some seeds for that consensus. So we very much appreciate your preparation for today, your participation today, and your willingness to, maybe if we're lucky, we'll send you a few questions in writing, not too many. But we'd ask if you get some of those that you respond to them promptly, and we'd be most grateful. With that, this hearing is adjourned. Thanks so much.